The year was 1991, and silence reigned over the streets of Moscow. The televisions went quiet, the generals disappeared, the lights of the Kremlin went out one by one. And in that moment, Russia's leader Boris Yeltsin vanished. For hours, no one knew where he was. Some witnesses claimed he was hiding in a secret bunker. Others said he was having covert meetings with the Americans. No one could fully explain what happened during those lost hours. But one truth remains. That night, the world changed. Today, we return to those mysterious moments that determined the collapse of the Soviets. Before you continue watching this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because we will continue to share history's darkest secrets with you. On the morning of August 19, 1991, at 6:20, a wave of panic began to spread inside the Russian parliament building known as the White House. Boris Yeltsin's security team had realized that the coup attempt had reached its final stage. Elite units of the Soviet army were entering the city, and tanks were positioning themselves along the banks of the Moscow River. But what was truly shocking was that Yeltsin would literally evaporate within a few hours. Even the guards in the Kremlin didn't know his location. Even the KGB's top agents had lost his trail. So how could this be possible? How could a country's leader become completely invisible right in the middle of a historic coup attempt? The truth is, what was going through Yeltsin's mind that morning was far more complex. Because behind the coup weren't just Soviet generals, but also some powerful figures inside the Kremlin. Yeltsin knew this. An intelligence report he received the night before stated that one of the coup leaders was one of his own advisors. This information had deeply shaken him. Now, the number of people he could trust didn't exceed the fingers of one hand. And what was most frightening was that he couldn't quite tell who inside the KGB was still loyal to him. But the move Yeltsin made that morning would go down in history. At 7:10, he quietly exited through the back door of the White House. Only two people were with him: his personal security chief Alexander Korsakov and his trusted advisor Gennady Burbulis. All three wore civilian clothes. They didn't use any official vehicles. Instead, they set off in an ordinary Lada car parked on the city streets. No one knew where they were going. Even Yeltsin's closest team members were unaware of the details of this plan, because Yeltsin wanted to reduce the possibility of a leak to zero. The car began moving quietly through the streets of Moscow. As they passed between the tanks, Yeltsin looked out the window. Soviet soldiers were stationed at every corner. Some had said they had orders not to fire on civilians, but Yeltsin didn't know how valid that was. Because the coup leader's biggest target was him. If they captured him, the resistance movement would collapse instantly. Yeltsin knew this very well. And perhaps that's why he didn't share the moves he made during those lost hours with anyone. So where was Yeltsin going? This is where things get even more mysterious. Because according to official records, Yeltsin was nowhere that morning. There isn't even a record of those hours in the Kremlin archives. But some witnesses claim he left Moscow. Another group says he took refuge in the American embassy. But perhaps the most interesting claim is that Yeltsin was in a secret military facility during those hours and met with some foreign intelligence officials there. The source of this claim was some CIA documents that emerged years later. The documents mentioned that a high-level meeting took place in Moscow in August 1991. But the details of this meeting were still classified. And it's at this exact point that our story deepens further. Because during the hours Yeltsin was missing, something else was happening in Moscow. The phones of some officials in the Kremlin were being tapped. A group of agents inside the KGB were conducting a covert operation against the coup leaders. The leader of these agents was one of Vladimir Kryukov's closest men. But he had betrayed Kryukov because he had seen that the collapse of the Soviet Union was inevitable. And he thought that if Yeltsin won, he could build himself a new future. This man's name remained secret for years. But some Russian researchers claim that he later became an important intelligence officer during Putin's era. Yeltsin's car was heading toward the industrial district in the western part of Moscow. This was an area dense with old Soviet-era factories. The streets were completely empty. The tanks hadn't reached this area yet. The car stopped in front of an old chemical factory. From the outside, it looked abandoned. But something was going on inside. Yeltsin got out of the vehicle and entered through the factory's back door. Korsakov and Burbulus followed him. Inside, a group of people was waiting for them. Who were these people? There is no information about this meeting in official records. But some witnesses claim there was an American intelligence official inside. Another witness says there were some Russian oligarchs there. So what was the truth? The reality is that in those days, the collapse of the Soviet Union wasn't just a political event. It was also a massive economic collapse. And those who profited most from this collapse were the oligarchs who played roles in the privatization process of state assets. Did Yeltsin make some deals with these oligarchs during the coup attempt? Some historians definitely think so. Because after the coup, Yeltsin's policies were shaped in a way far too favorable to the oligarchs' interests. But no one knows for certain the content of this meeting. Because what happened in the factory that day remained a secret for years. After leaving the factory, Yeltsin got back in a car. This time their destination was different. The car headed toward a military base in the southern part of Moscow. This base was the headquarters of one of the Soviet Army's elite units. But what was interesting was that this unit's commander was against the coup leaders. The commander's name was Yevgeny Shaposhnikov. He was one of the rare generals who remained loyal to Yeltsin. In that day, his meeting with Yeltsin would determine the fate of the coup. Shaposhnikov gave Yeltsin very important information. He said that the coup leaders' military support was much weaker than they thought. He reported that most soldiers didn't want to comply with coup orders, and that some units were even openly taking Yeltsin's side. This information was revolutionary for Yeltsin, because until that day, he thought the coup leaders had complete control. But the information Shaposhnikov provided showed that this wasn't the case at all. Yeltsin made a decision at that moment. He would stop staying hidden and address the people directly. But in doing so, he would also make a dramatic move. He would climb onto a tank and speak. And that's how that famous scene was born. After leaving the military base, Yeltsin returned directly to the White House. It was past 11 o'clock. The end of the lost hours was coming. But the meetings Yeltsin had during those hours and the decisions he made would change the course of history. Thousands of people had gathered in front of the White House. When Yeltsin came out, the crowd greeted him with applause. And then that famous moment came. Yeltsin climbed onto a tank and began speaking. He said he didn't recognize the coup plotters, that he would resist them, and called on the people to take to the streets. That moment became the symbolic beginning of the collapse of the Soviet Union. But behind this scene was another truth. The moment Yeltsin climbed onto the tank wasn't by chance. That tank had been specifically chosen. The tank's commander was one of Shaposhnikov's most trusted men, and the tank was positioned so that it wouldn't fire during Yeltsin's speech. In fact, some sources even claim there were no shells inside the tank. So that scene was a much more calculated move than it appeared. Yeltsin had managed to minimize risk while creating maximum impact. The coup attempt lasted 3 days. But the moves Yeltsin made during those lost hours played a critical role in the coup's failure. Because the meetings he had during those hours with oligarchs, American intelligence, and loyal generals had empowered the resistance movement. On August 21st, the coup leaders surrendered. Gorbachev was freed from isolation in Crimea. But the real winner was Yeltsin. Because after the coup, control of the Soviet Union passed completely into his hands. So what really happened during those lost hours? We may never learn the full answer to this question. Because throughout his life, Yeltsin never gave a detailed explanation about those hours. He only provided general information in a few interviews. But he always kept the real details hidden. And this secret went to the grave with him. But some documents began to surface years later. In 2007, during research conducted in Russian archives, an interesting document was found. The document was dated August 19, 1991. Its content stated that Yeltsin had left Moscow that morning, but it didn't specify where he went. There was only one note at the bottom of the document: Operation Delta. This note led to debates for years. What was Operation Delta? Who had organized it? And what was its purpose? Some researchers claim that Operation Delta was an escape plan organized by the CIA. According to this plan, if the coup had succeeded, Yeltsin would be smuggled out of Moscow and taken to a safe place. But when the coup failed, the plan didn't go into effect. Another theory is that Operation Delta was a security operation financed by Russian oligarchs. According to this theory, the oligarchs had set up a special team to protect Yeltsin and had hidden him in a secret location for hours. But none of these theories can be supported with definitive evidence, because all documents related to Operation Delta are still classified. And it's right here that we reach the most mysterious part of our story. Because there's another claim about Yeltsin's lost hours. This claim is extremely striking and at the same time disturbing. According to the claim, during those hours Yeltsin met not only with Americans or oligarchs, but also with a group of agents inside the KGB. And these agents had made a deal with Yeltsin to shape the intelligence structure of the new Russia to be established after the coup. The most interesting aspect of this claim is that a young KGB officer was also among this group of agents. This officer's name was Vladimir Putin. Of course, this claim cannot be supported with definitive evidence, because Putin was still a low-level KGB officer in 1991. But some researchers claim that he was involved in covert operations during that period and was connected to one of the teams responsible for Yeltsin's security. If this is true, Yeltsin's lost hours could be the moments when the foundations were laid not only for the collapse of the Soviets, but also for the Putin era. This would be one of history's greatest ironies, because while Yeltsin was striving to democratize his country, he might actually have been preparing the ground for the rise of a future authoritarian leader. After the coup, the Soviet Union collapsed rapidly. In December 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. Yeltsin became the first president of a new Russian Federation, and the oligarchs made enormous fortunes in the privatization process of state assets. But the people faced economic collapse. Inflation soared, unemployment increased, the social security system collapsed. Yeltsin's popularity dropped rapidly, and in 1999, he made an unexpected move and resigned. He put Prime Minister Vladimir Putin in his place. And this is where the circle closes, because one of the first things Putin did after coming to power was to classify the documents from Yeltsin's era. Especially documents related to August 1991 were given the highest level of secrecy. Why? Because those documents might contain secrets that could change the course of history. Perhaps the truth about Yeltsin's lost hours is written inside those documents. Perhaps Putin really was there during those hours. And perhaps the collapse of the Soviets was part of a much more complex game than it appeared. But one truth remains. August 1991 was one of the most critical moments in world history. And the moves Boris Yeltsin made during those lost hours changed the course of history. The Soviet Union collapsed, the Cold War ended, the world entered a new era. But we don't fully know what really happened during those hours. And perhaps we never will. Because history sometimes keeps its most important secrets forever. And Yeltsin's lost hours will perhaps remain one of history's best-kept secrets. But we won't stop pursuing this secret, because illuminating history's dark corners is essential for understanding the past and shaping the future. And that's why we won't stop pursuing these mysterious hours. Maybe one day, the whole truth will emerge. Maybe one day, we'll fully learn what happened during those hours. But until that day, this secret will remain one of history's greatest mysteries.